going against the flow, does that open up any opportunities for you? Does it allow you to be creative? Don't be stultified by the notion that says you got to find a way to follow everybody else and be like everybody else in the crowd. I mean, that to me sucks the life out of you. It sucks the creativity out of you. You can't breathe in the crowd. You just can't. And so how can you be creative and innovative and launch a startup if you think like everybody else? And that's part of the problem.
Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the episode today, we have Roy Osing. Roy, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful that you invited me to be here with you.
I'm grateful for you too. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so I've been around business for over 40 years. I started out as a systems analyst, and I ended up as president and chief marketing officer of a large telecom company in Canada, where I had the opportunity to work with some pretty amazing people to actually grow the data and internet business to $1 billion in sales in a relatively short period of time, albeit that was when, the whole data scene was erupting, quite frankly. But we can talk about the challenges and so forth that entailed, because clearly it was a challenge. So I've sort of been that sort of guy for my life, getting involved in things that needed transformation. So I'm kind of like, if I could describe myself in one word, it would be breakaway. I'm a breakaway dude that doesn't like tradition necessarily, always questions it, very uncomfortable with the status quo, looking for edge, looking for things that need to be done differently in business particularly. And then I learned that it applies so well to personal development and what people expect out of their lives and careers. And so I guess I spent my whole life trying to veer away from the momentum that's been created by rote and the status quo into finding opportunities that are there if we would only look for them. And so I'm a breakaway, different guy. I applied that concept. I applied it very early in my career. I apply it to my personal life. I apply it to my grandchildren. I am known as the audacious papa, and that's very strategic, done on purpose. And so I can tell your listeners that the sort of things that we're going to be talking about today, they can trust. They work because I did them. This is not textbook stuff. It's simplicity personified. That's my world. And hopefully I can excite some of your listeners to try some of the stuff and reap the benefits. That's who Roy is.
Thank you for the introduction. What would you say you're a contrarian?
Absolutely, I'm a contrarian. In fact, going against the flow, I found to be one of the biggest sources of opportunities, because it is being different. I mean, my mantra is be different or be dead. I've written 7 books around that concept, and it's all based on that. Stepping out, not stepping in, blending, not blending in. And so contrarianism is actually one of the things that I discuss with clients as representing an opportunity, a way to be different. Now, contrarianism does have its limits, and I'm not asking people to do things that are not necessarily legal, but I am saying there are degrees of freedom within which one has available to them, if only they would step out and say, hey, the herd's going west. What would happen if I went east? Instead of saying the herd's heading west, let's find out what they're doing, which is the benchmark copying model, which I absolutely find repugnant. I think there's way too much copying and not enough creativity in the world today. And one of the reasons for that is we teach kids and adults to color inside the lines. We don't teach them to be contrarian. Well, I'm a contrarian guy. Love it. Love the idea.
Would you say that's because of your personality, or because of the results that you get from being a contrarian?
Yeah, no, it's got nothing to do with personality. And my personality adapted basically to what I discovered I needed to be successful and drive $1 billion worth of sales in terms of results. So this is all performance related stuff. Like being audacious in and of itself is a ridiculous notion unless you can link it to results. And I'm extremely results oriented, obviously, as described by my background. I've achieved some, pretty interesting things, and I've learned that it takes certain things to get you there. And one of the things, and by the way, there's no silver bullets here, right? There's a whole bunch of little mini audacious moments that actually get you to where you need to get to. And one of them happens to be, consider what being a contrarian would do for you. Going against the flow, does that open up any opportunities for you? Does it allow you to be creative? Don't be stultified by the notion that says you got to find a way to follow everybody else and be like everybody else in the crowd. I mean, that to me sucks the life out of you. It sucks the creativity out of you. You can't breathe in the crowd. You just can't. And so how can you be creative and innovative and launch a startup if you think like everybody else? And that's part of the problem. We've taught people to think like other people. I'm overgeneralizing, okay, because there's one or two or three or four or five or six people that don't fit that. But for the most part, if you look at the bell curve, most people fit under that big, huge part of the bell curve. And so my view is if we can move those guys, a couple of points to the right, wow, just imagine what would happen in terms of performance. It would be rocketing up. So yeah, the genesis is if it's not performance-based, I don't want to talk about it. We're not here to be cute and weird and sexy. We're here to get results. And I've just figured out how to do it by being weird, cute, and sexy.
That's how people describe you, right?
No, I don't know. That just came up. I haven't had breakfast yet. So, that just came out of hunger, I suppose.
Well, it reminds me of a Earl Nightingale, either principle or quote, which is the 95% of, let's say, businesses get average results. And so if you want average results, then you just have to act like the 95%. And, that speaks to your contrarian position. You referenced before we recorded that there's some stuff in textbooks which are based on theory and not practice. Would you mind clarifying, I guess, what the main, should we say, myths are around what you
Sure.
found?
I mean, it's not the textbook I call it textbook thinking. And what I mean by that is thinking and behavior that's driven by what the book says, what the theory says, as opposed to observing that and doing what actually works in the trenches with frontline people, with internal politics, biasness, all that kind of stuff, which cannot be formularized. Okay, it cannot be formularized, that stuff. Be more influenced by that, the practical aspect of what the solution might be, as opposed to being solely driven by what the textbook says. It's not that the textbook, and let me use an example. Leadership is a classic. Okay, there are, I don't know, billions of books on leadership. And it's not that they're wrong necessarily. It's just in my experience, they don't go far enough. They do not go far enough to define what constitutes a standout, knock your socks off, mind-blowing leader that captures the hearts and souls of people in an organization. And why do you want to do that? You want to do that because you have to execute. Why do you have to execute? To drive superlative performance. It all goes back to that, okay? So my learning is that superlative performance does not have its genesis in rote textbook thinking. It's helpful, but it does not determine success. There's a lot of other silly little things, which we can talk about, that actually are much more influential. Like, for example, I never use regression analysis to do a forecast whatsoever. I never use my formal degree is in mathematics and computer science. I've never used differential equations to solve any business problem. I mean, what it taught me is how to solve problems. Okay, that's true. But in terms of the actual content, not particularly helpful. And so I run into people with MBAs who actually believe that if they behave like solving a case studies would imply, then that will make them successful and earn them six figures. Well, I mean, help. I mean, I got no time for that. Seriously. It's like, it's a neat platform to have, but never believe that it's going to make you successful. There's a lot of other things that you need to do with that as a platform to be successful, to stand out, be visible, be remarkable, be different, be contrarian, get noticed, and get rewarded for that. Nobody talks about that. That's what I talk.
Well, I'm really interested to know what you think about this point, because I was going to ask you about the definition of audacious leadership, so what that means to you. But from my perspective, I've had a fair number of people come on the show talking about leadership. And I would say the new consensus is that the old way of, let's say, shouting at people to get them to do what you want the consensus is that that's gone, that's done now. And that the new leader is more like a, servant leadership. So, more of a mentor than someone who's going to tell you what to do. So firstly, what does audacious leadership mean? And what do you think about that approach?
I'll answer reverse. First of all, I believe that the notion of servant leadership is the right notion. The whole command and control paradigm, if you will, of the past has been out for years, by the way. This is not a new conversation. I mean, the people that have suddenly discovered servant leadership, I mean, where the hell have they been for the last 2 decades? Right? I mean, my discovery was the key thing to ask people is, how can I help? And it occurred to me that, but by virtue of asking that question, you're really putting yourself in a position of serving them, trying to make their life easier, trying to knock down barriers, trying to grease the skids inside an organization. And again, why would I want to do that? I would want to do that because if they can perform their function better, they can execute my plan better. And guess what happens when they execute better? It all goes back to performance. So this discovery for me, this is not a remarkable insight, right? That's part of the textbook issue I have, right? This has been so obvious for so many years for people like myself that have spent most of their times in the trenches with frontline people. A president of a company spending their time with frontline people to do what? Learn what they do, learn the issues they have, learn the problems that they have executing the strategy, and trying to help them. So how can I help is basically it. The audacious piece, Thomas, comes into how do you do it? Okay, so that's where the textbook stops, right? So honor and salute servant leadership. I call it how can I help leadership. But the audacious piece, which by the way is defined in my lexicon by words like bold, unheard of, fearless, risky, all of those things, off the wall, outside the lines, that defines how you actually get the job done. And it's really simple. It's really simple. And this is why it's not covered by academics. This is why it's not covered by kind of like the pundits. And the reason it's not covered is they're not aware of it. Why aren't they aware of it? Because they've never run $1 billion a year company. Okay, so this whole thing is rooted in experience, right? Like mind-blowing leadership concepts that are audacious, one of which is hire for goosebumps. That's an example. That's one of my audacious ways of recruiting the people you need in the organization to take care of customers, earn their loyalty, retain their business, and improve your performance. So the question becomes what is hiring for goosebumps? Would you like to know?
I'd love to know.
It's a silly, come on. I mean, this is so easy. So it occurred to me early on that if you actually apply some logic to this whole customer loyalty thing, as opposed to formulas for retention, which is what a lot of people do, it all comes down to earning people's trust. And what is that based on? That's based on having a great relationship with them, taking care of them, doing what they want without sacrificing the needs of the company, of course, which is easy to do. And so it occurred to me that we need to hire people with those capabilities, with the innate understanding and willingness to serve Homo sapiens. Started out with that notion. If you don't love people, love humans, how on earth are we ever going to execute a strategy based on building strong customer relationships? Now, I know you've never heard anybody talk like this. Doesn't surprise me, right? So I came up with this idea. Says, well, how will I know if I'm interviewing somebody for a job in my organization? How will I know whether or not they actually have in their DNA a desire to serve people? So I came up with this question. Say, oh, by the way, as president, I would sit in on interviews with frontline customer service people. I would sit on interviews with internal auditors. I would sit in on interviews for marketing professionals. And that's just what I did, because my job was to put my fingerprints on the organization. We can talk about delegation later. I've got a different spin on that too. Anyways, so I came up with this question. The question was really simple. So I'd look at you and I'd say, Thomas, do you like human beings? And of course, the first thing you do is sit back a little bit, because you've never been asked that question before, probably. And if you had, yeah, it's kind of weird. And so, but you're interested. And so you, of course, what you would say is, yes, Roy, of course I do. So then I would just follow up with you and say, well, good. Tell me a story that would show the fact that you love human beings. Now, this is where it separates the people that are playing the game from the people who really get it. And so one of two things would happen, right? Either one, the person, didn't really like humans, but they were playing the game. And of course, that in the answer, you feel like, cold like a fish, for heaven's sake. The person that got it and actually does have the ability would tell you a story, the warm story with passion and emotion that would just kind of like, oh my God, what would it do? It would give you goosebumps. So what I concluded is I'm going for the people that give me goosebumps. My whole organization was taught that. Okay, like I'm assuming you can think. I'm assuming that you can, that I can teach you the basis of the business. But what I can't teach you, I cannot teach you how to love people. And it's important to me that you do. I can teach you how to smile, right? Oh, hi, how are you doing? The grin guy, you can teach people how to grin, but you cannot teach them how to love people. And so we launched this. Well, I got to tell you, my fellow executives thought I was a little off the wall. No kidding. I completely reinvented our recruitment process around, and it wasn't just customer service, because, and if you can't care for your fellow employees, how on earth can you care for your customers? And so the whole notion had an internal perspective, all carefully contrived to drive behavior to the outside, which is where eventually we had to go. So that's an example of what I would consider to be an audacious move, because, nobody did it. It was absolutely unheard of before. And in retrospect, yeah, that fits into my audacious bucket nicely, and there's many more of those around it. One of the things I learned is, oh my God, we got to do a lot of these things. We got to do a lot of these small things concurrently, not to confuse people, but to do them in a way that people welcomed them. It was easy for them to sort of get into the flow and momentum of doing these kind of crazy things, and just sit back and watch and say, how can I help? How can I help? How can I help in the workplace? And, over time, it was quite effective. The challenge I had, though, is in the telecom world, we were moving from a voice centric mode of operation into data. So we had to change the company. We had to change the culture. We had to change the people, because what you need in an internet world is completely different than what you need in a voice world. And so at the same time, when all of this got going on, in a way, it was kind of an advantage that all these little audacious moves were defining the new culture that we needed. Brilliant. It worked. It totally worked. And we looked back and said, wow, we're at $1 billion in top line revenue. What the?
I have to ask, do you love human beings, and do you have a story about it?
Do I love human beings? Yeah, I do. I'm not so sure though that I'm tolerant enough. So deep down, see, I have this kind of like strategic bent. So I sort of know where we need to go with this stuff. But when it gets right down to it, it's easy for me to ask, how can I help? It's really easy. And it's easy for me to follow up on that. And it's easy for me to kind of put in motion the sorts of things that we need to do to kind of answer the question. And so I'm not so sure that I was born with the DNA, even though I preach that we need that. But I must have had something going on that was leaning me that way. The problem is when you're asked the question and you have to go introspectively, and you can ask people that are just like, they're diabolical human being lovers, but when you ask them this question that you asked, they trip a little bit, just like I am. And I guess I feel that way. I know it's important, and and we did it consistently.
Well, but I did have some thoughts during it because I wanted to, ask the best possible question, maybe about introverts or maybe about database people, but you were specifically talking about customer service orientated people, and therefore, it's a great question to ask because you need people in that role to love people, and you wouldn't necessarily be applying for a customer service role, I don't think.
Well, but it also applies, like it also applies to every other position in the organization, because you have that whole internal supplier and customer relationship thing going on, right? For example, marketing serves sales. The sales guys don't get what they need from marketing, there's going to be an execution problem, right? So the ability for marketers to actually serve salespeople is incredibly important to drive good sales results. Absolutely. And then you go back and look at the people in HR. They have customers too, one of whom is marketers. Is a marketing organization getting what they need from HR in terms of support? Okay, well, if the people in HR hate human beings, chances are there's going to be some slip-ups. And so that same question, do you like humans, I asked of everybody, because everybody has a customer in business and actually in life, right? I have a customer. My wife is my customer. My sons are my customers. My grandchildren are my customers. My job as the patriarch of the family is to help. How can I do that? It's the same issue, same flow to it as you would do in an interview with a customer service people. In fact, I would say that the organizations that just apply this to customer service, they get found out. They get found out because at the end of the day, there's going to be a service screw up. Okay. And when the customer service person has to reach back into the organization to get it fixed and they run into roadblocks, the customer puts that on customer service and says, that's on you, right? So you're lying to me. You're lying to me that you care. While it could be that the service rep, of course, cares, but everybody behind her doesn't give a shit. So boom, you're done.
There you go. The number that you used about your startup of being to $1 billion, I think you said, that kind of number is not within most people's reach, I would say, as owners, perhaps. So what would you say, I want to know what business you were in at the time, but also what would you say is the biggest driver of that number?
Well, yeah, so the business was the data and internet business in the telecom world at a time when it was just taking off, and we were trying to move from dial-up to 1.5 megabit service. So, that's a while ago, okay? But we are also trying to drag ourselves out of, I mentioned this earlier, trying to drag ourselves out of voice and to be a highly nimble, competitive organization in a brand new business, in a brand new market space. And so when we started, Yeah, we did. We weren't at zero revenues. Okay, full disclosure, because the data world had existed, albeit it was, I would call it embryonic. So yeah, we had a little bit of a run rate, but I mean, it required a big push to get it to where we need to get to. We didn't have a billion in mind. Okay, I mean, people ask me, well, did you start out with the billion? No, we knew that the opportunity had to be significant. We knew that in order to satisfy our shareholders, we needed to perform in an order of magnitude way. And if we didn't, we would probably run into some competitive issues that could harm ourselves in the long run. So we knew that the step function, the vertical piece was significant, but we didn't know whether it was a 10 million or 5 million or a billion. That was observed in retrospect. So we knew that had to be order of magnitude. And that in and of itself drove us to the audacious kind of like strategic imperative, just the notion that it was so big. And I apply the same thinking to any startup. It's not about the billion. It's about how big do you want to be? And this is my first question I ask them when we do what I call my strategic game planning process, which, by the way, I had to create myself. That's another piece of audaciousness, because the planning experts at the time wanted me to spend all my time on developing SWOTs instead of figuring out how to execute this puppy. So I had to build myself a planning process based on execution, which is kind of like perverse in a way. When somebody says, well, what's your planning philosophy? I say my plan is to execute. Let me show you how I can do that. And so I developed a process that's around three questions. The first one starts with, how big do you want to be? Because I believe the nature of your growth objective, and I tell this to startup presidents, the nature of your growth perspective or objective drives and determines the character of your strategy. If you're at zero and you want to grow to $150, that you can get there with a certain kind of strategy. But if your objective is to go to $10 million in 24 months as opposed to $150, that's going to require a completely different strategy. And that's how I started out. The rest of the world doesn't do that, Thomas. What they do is they create a strategy, drive out some numbers. They're not happy with the numbers, so they change the assumptions driving the numbers, which inherently changes the strategy. And then you say, okay, done, boom. Well, is there any wonder why those results aren't achieved? You can't do it that way. I mean, the number should drive the nature of the strategy. And so that's what I do with people, particularly startups. Tell me, figure it out. How big do you want to be in 24 months? And by the way, it's not about 5-year plans. 5-year plans are absolutely meaningless because the fourth year of a 5-year plan never shows up. And yet we hockey stick the thing to say, well, if we don't get what we need in the first 3 years, we'll get it in the fourth year. So by having a short time horizon on your plan, it drives you to execute, and it drives you to stay on performance like every week. So that's how we start the whole process, is with that. It's an extremely important question, and it leads to the second question, which I ask: where are you going to get it from? Okay, so let's say that your revenue objective is to grow by $10 million over the next 24 months as the answer to the how big. The next question says, where are you going to get the revenue? And this is a question of choosing customer targets that have the latent potential to give you the money. And it's a tough question, because ideally, right, again, with my execution hat on, I want to get all 10 millions from a single customer. That makes the job real easy. Not likely that's going to happen. Okay, but it starts out there. I said, okay, what if you have to get it for 2? Tell me your 2 customers. And we go that route. We don't start out with, tell me the market, because that's mass market thinking. And we know that mass markets don't exist. They don't. No 2 people ever have the same latent potential to do anything. They don't think the same. So we try and come up with 1 or 2 or 3, not 25, 26, but about a confined number of customer groups. Let's call them customer groups or people groups to give it a little more humanity. Then segments, market segments, kind of third person. That's another example of what textbooks do. They don't call them people groups. They call them market segments. So we come up with that. So now we're going to get 10 million. We're going to get the 10 million from these 3 customer groups because we've studied them. We know they have the latent potential. The final question is the killer question. It says, how do you intend to compete and win in those three groups? And that's the whole competitive thing. And so, this is where you run into customer companies that say, well, we're the best at, we're the market leader at, we're better than, blah, blah, blah. All these, I call it claptrap because it doesn't mean anything. These sorts of competitive statements are meaningless, right? And they don't inform the organization to do anything, right? Because they're so vague. So I had to create this concept called the only statement. The only statement is really simple, and it goes like this. We will compete and win by being the only ones that fill in the blanks, right? The only ones, not the best, right? Not the leader in, not the premium supplier of, because all that stuff is not audacious. It's confusing. It obfuscates the real purpose, which is to provide clarity so that when we open our mouths and talk to a customer and say, you should do business with me because, guess what comes out? The only statement, because we're the only ones that do something. And so we spend a lot of time creating that only statement. And when we do it, then we put the answers to those three questions together. And that's the game plan. That's what we did to move ourselves along every year. And that's what we try and do. That's what I try and do with young people who have these great ideas about starting businesses. We go through that, and with particular emphasis on the third question. Like, there's so many people that want to start a business, but they're not only at anything, or they're not creating uniqueness. They're not creating differences, right? They're technology driven, and they believe the technology will actually sell the idea and make them a millionaire. It doesn't work that way. And so I would say to them, look, if your idea isn't unique, if it's not unique in terms of satisfying a compelling, relevant benefit to somebody that you want to target, then stop. You need to think about this a little more. Don't waste your money, because all you will do is fall into the 50% of the organizations that die within 36 months. That's all you're going to do. You're going to be part of the statistic. And so, we did that. That became a natural thing for us. And man, I got to tell you, this is not yesterday's news. I mean, I wrote the first Be Different or Be Dead in 2009. And these ideas were really different then. They're still different. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you two things. First of all, they withstand the test of time. That tells you about the resilience of the ideas and the notion. And it also describes the mediocrity that's going on out there about creating organizations that execute in favor of customers. That's what it teaches you. That's why I'm doing this stuff. Let's change the conversation. Let's get away from that. Let's get away from perpetuating mediocrity into being contrarian and trying little things that your frontline people will honor you for. And when they do that, they execute profusely and your performance goes up. Sorry, I slipped into that bit of philosophical thing, but I can't help it. It's just like so frustrating to me, because the sorts of things that and by working with young companies, I see it and nothing has changed. So maybe through having these kinds of conversations, we can, and maybe we do this again in a different venue or whatever, but I don't know. We just got to keep banging away at it, I think, to try and get some attention, a bigger part of the attention span, so that people actually try some of these things. One of the things I get back is, yeah, but Roy, my boss doesn't believe in that. How can I do that? And I acknowledge that that's a major challenge. But I also will say that there's a whole lot of things you can do to be different, to be audacious within your frame of reference. Why aren't you doing those? Why are you blaming it on the fact you don't have a good boss? I don't let people off the hook, Thomas. No. There's going to be 150 ideas why they shouldn't do the right thing. I'm not willing to listen to that. I'm not going to be your dude that's going to be the patsy to say, oh yeah, poor baby, No, get out there and do something different.
High standards. I think high standards is a good thing. But because I really like the concept of the only statement, I do want to ask you about whether you make a distinction between that and the USP. or whether it's one and the same, or so I was thinking that possibly the USP is perhaps not implemented, and that's why you called it the only statement. But your thoughts?
What's USP?
Unique selling proposition.
Oh, well, I've seen some of those, but they don't speak to why should I do business with you and not the other guy. I've not seen one that speaks to that. Okay, not one. So, I mean, in words, they should be, okay, but no, I'm not there. Plus, I would say to you that if you did find one that is binary, because that's what the only statement is, it either exists or it doesn't exist. And I'm not seeing a unique selling proposition that actually passes the binary test. But if I did, the next thing I would do is I would go up the chain and look at the organization strategy, okay, and see what it says. Because if it doesn't say that, then I would say, why do you have a unique selling proposition that doesn't have its roots and genesis in the strategic game plan of the organization? So you see, because what happens is, particularly salespeople, they're struggling. They need it. They want it. Okay. And if they can't get it, if they can't be informed of it from the strategy statements of the organization, they invent it themselves. And sometimes that gets you into dysfunction. Okay. So, there's a couple of things going on there for me. Not just, the characteristics of the statement, and does it fit the profile of the only? That's one piece. The other piece is, like, I always look up, right? I'll look up to the strategy and say, what's it telling me to do? Is it telling me to do what that unique selling proposition says? And if it's silent on that, my question to sales is, why are you doing that? Let's have a look at that. Let's make sure that we're homeomorphic with the strategic intent of the business, right? And that you're not inventing something. And I'm not being mean to sales. I mean, look, we all do that. If we can't get the direction we want, we'll go and try and figure it out ourselves. Of course, that has the potential for creating, if you have 10,000 people in your organization, which I did, that could create 10,000 moments of discontinuity and dysfunction. You just got to be careful. If calling the only state, if crafting the unique selling proposition is all about really crafting an only statement, I'm your best friend. If it's not, I'm not your best friend.
I think the intent is there. So for every client of our business, I always ask what your USP is, because it's an encouragement to get people to think about what makes them different than any other business that's out there. So what is it that only you do that no one else does? And the wording of it is obviously that you can't be uniquer or uniquest. It's unique, meaning there's no one else out there that does it. But what people give as an answer to the USP doesn't fit that. So you're reframing it slightly and probably going to get a much better answer by calling it the only statement, I would imagine.
Well, it's and by the way, please feel free. I'd like to see some of that. Send me some of 2 or 3 that you've got from people, and let me take a look at them. I don't mind doing that and give you my views. But the intent of only, and this is what people will say is so difficult about the exercise, is exactly what you said. It's to give it the edge and to force clarity, and not allow ourselves to get away with saying our unique selling proposition is that we provide unique technology in the blah, blah, blah. Because sometimes people will define it with repeating words, et cetera, et cetera. It's not that. The other thing is it's the unique selling proposition is generally what you think you're unique at. And my challenge is always to say, so what and who cares? I don't care what you think. I want you to tell me what you're getting from customers, because the only statement has to be true. It has to be relevant to what people care about. And I'm going to come back to that. And it has to be compelling. Those are the 3 criteria of the only statement. And it's exceedingly difficult to put together. And I say to people, let's get it about 80% right, and let's go work with it, because you have to test it. So the other thing I say to sales guys that give me the USB thing is, okay, let me see the results of testing it with customers. Did they tell you you're lying, or did they tell you you're absolutely true? And so we spent a lot of time testing our only statements with our frontline people, with customers, and we end up, quite frankly, having to adjust and modify. And by the way, it's organic, right? It doesn't exist forever, because you get people, the bad guys, coming in, eating your lunch, and you've got to, move and so on and so forth. You got to do this sorts of thing. And so it's got to be alive all the time. I've not seen, to be honest with you, actually, I've seen some bad only statements, and it's because people have tripped on the only. Maybe they've read my stuff, but they do a terrible job of it, right? In other words, I've seen some only statements that claim companies are the only ones that do something that is totally irrelevant. An example is we have a radio station in Vancouver that advertises themselves to be the only ones that provide traffic and weather on the 10s. But we also have a traffic and weather station that only provide traffic and weather every minute of the day. And so the organization that uses only to say they do it every 10 minutes is completely irrelevant. And I've actually written the owner of the company and said, I really like the fact that you're using only, but the problem is you're only something at something that's completely irrelevant, because your competitor's doing it 24/7. I mean, it's just there's a lot of rules. And I would ask and urge people watching or listening in, go to my website, go to the blog, search for the only statement and read the stuff. Like, it's all there. It explains what it is, the onlys that we've created. What are the rules? What are the things you need to look out for? It talks about aspirations and intents, exactly what you said. I got no time for intentions, because unfortunately intentions are aspirational. They do not degenerate into actions. And actions are what we need, not intention. Don't care about intention. Absolutely don't care about them. I've written a lot about the stupidity of aspirational mission statements, right? That actually inform nobody of anything. And it's all going back to the original part of this conversation. It's all driven by my concern to get better results. And that's only driven by executing better. So all of this stuff, from only statements to goosebumps to all this, it has one intended outcome, and that's to perform better. And I've discovered that it works. So you won't find the only statement in a textbook. I know you'll find, now that I understand what unique selling proposition is, you won't find that. You won't find Roy's only, though.
I'm sure you can find it in a textbook somewhere. I'm sure of it. But
I don't know. I don't think so.
Google it. The USP.
If you Google it, you'll get me.
Yeah, I don't mean your one. I mean the USP one.
Oh, the USP. Yeah, I'm sure you will.
What are your goals?
My goals, really simple, because I'm a simple guy. I hope I've made that clear. My goal through this is, I mentioned it earlier, is to change the conversation, to have these conversations about what we need to do differently to run businesses, to be more successful, to have happier lives, because this stuff applies to individuals in their life, seeking differences and not blending in and being experimental. And so, I say, what I'd like you to do is tomorrow, do one thing that is really different, that you're uncomfortable with, and give up something that you are comfortable with. Let's start there, right? Go in baby steps. Nano inches, I call them, nano inches worth of progress. Get an inch of progress fast. That's a nano inch. Just do that. So that's my goal, is to keep banging away at this stuff. I've got probably 30 podcasts planned over the next 90 days. And it's all driven by, on May the 31st, this book will be out to bookstores, right? And so what I'd like to do is have it not an unknown commodity when people see it. I would like people to be interested enough in the ideas that we're talking about to go get a handout. This is a handout, right? You can go like this, Thomas, and you can pick, okay, one page. Many people I associated over my career were major complainers, and they didn't understand that there was a significant market opportunity in pissed off customers. All right. We talk about stuff like that. So that's my goal. Try to raise awareness and excitement in trying to change the conversation. That would be it. Great question. Thank you for that.
Wow. Equally great answer. So, and I'm very interested in the book. You've got a customer here. So, but is there anything that I should have asked you about today?
Well, I don't know that. No, first of all, I really enjoyed it. And thank you for opening up basically the essence of what I've done and what I'm doing and what I want to do. I will make an offer if you want to hear a special offer for your guests or for your listeners and your audience. I have a special offer that I would like to give you if you'd like to hear it.
Go for it.
Okay. So the offer is called Pay Audacious Forward. So this is Audacious, the book, right? It's Be Different or Be Dead. And so what I would like to do is offer anyone who's interested this. If you buy a copy of this, and by the way, you can buy this from me personally now because I have advanced copies as an author. So I have access to this. Nobody can get it out of bookstores and that, but you can get it from Roy. Anybody who wants to buy one of these, I will, for a friend or a leadership colleague or something like that, right? Somebody that they trust and admire, and they think they would value that. If they do that, then what I will do is I will give that person a free copy of Audacious, and I'll sign it and make it personalized. So it's buy one for a colleague, get one free, signed by myself, hopefully with some meaningful words that will resonate with them. And all they have to do is get a hold of me at my Gmail address, roy.osing@gmail.com, and we'll make it happen. I mean, I don't have a huge logistical strategy to deliver this stuff. We'll figure it out on the run. That's planning on the run. That's what I stand for anyways. And I'd be really happy. To provide people a couple of books.
You ship to the UK or no?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll ship anywhere. It's just money. Somebody's going to pay for it.
Exactly.
Depends on how much you want it.
Where do people go if they want to buy the book?
Well, you can start out by going to my website, www.bedifferentorbedead.com. Bedifferentorbedead.com is my website. And there's an icon there, say, called Roy's Books. If you click on that, you'll see this book, and it'll tell you where you can go to pre-order the book. Okay, so that's one sort of thing. And you'll see the other books I have as well, because I've got 7 of them in total. Same thing, some ebooks and another printed version. If they want to talk to me about the Pay Audacious Forward, just send me an email at roy.osing@gmail.com. We'll figure it out a way to get the books to you, and we'll change the conversation.
I bet you can. Thank you for being a great guest today.
Thank you very much for, first of all, being a great host. I think you did a great job. And also, I'm seriously grateful to have a chance to talk to the people you trust, who are your listeners and viewers. I appreciate that.
Well, for all the listeners, please review the links in the description. And Roy, thank you very much.
You're welcome.